Partnership. The Intercongregational Partnership Committee welcomes everyone to our program tonight. We want to dedicate this event to our remembrance of Marty Gann's class, who was a longtime co-chair of the committee. He was an advocate for interfaith connections and a real mensch. We are all sorrowfully aware of the war in Israel and pray for a quick resolution. Tonight, let us put aside the world's troubles and celebrate our interfaith connections with this evening of sharing. Okay, the way it's going to work, each presenter will speak for 5 or 6 minutes. We will have a Q&A session at the end of all the speakers. Audience members can write questions in the chat or just ask them during the Q&A discussion. And we ask that you please stay muted unless you are the speaker. And if you forget, Elizabeth will fix it. Okay. Now we'll hear from our pastor from the Bradley Hills Presbyterian Church, David Gray.
Well, just to echo the gratitude that our Mary has lifted up to each one of us for being able to connect tonight, and to all those who have agreed to speak, and all of us who are here for as we have this time. It does allow us in a time of such anguish to set aside just a time of real trouble and focus on the deep unity within diversity and within love that I've come to know from the members of Maqaame Ibrahim and BJC, Bethesda Jewish Congregation, and Bradley Hills, and so I, as I talk to Tasmiyah or communicate with Tasmiyah and with Rabbi Eric, we're all just heartbroken at a land that is holy and held dear, and it just underscores the resolve and importance of what we do at 6601, and the desire to seek to understand and to learn from the perspectives and experiences that certainly have enriched my life from you all here. And that's what I know tonight, and what Mary has invited us to, and Marilyn and so many others. And it's certainly the way Marty lived, and it's certainly what that spirit continues with. So let us do take a moment of prayer, and then I'm looking forward to the presentations myself. God, we ask that as we gather this evening, that we might get a glimpse of the sacredness that can be found in learning and growing from listening and sharing, as a time where there is much pain in the world. We lift up with the psalmist that you, Lord, we hope, come quickly, our help and our deliverer. We pray for those around the world, but particularly in holy lands where both death and destruction and great anguish are so prevalent, and so we pray for peace. We pray for peace, and in the way in which salam and shalom and peace is known in many voices, may those things that are common to all humans ultimately prevail, and may your spirit be present. And tonight, God, as we seek to learn from each other, may this be a blessed time and a time of connection with an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow closer together, and an opportunity once again to model the incredible miracle of what happens in our midst, in our communities, when we put love at the forefront. Amen.
Amen. And Rabbi, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
Sure. Really just echoing everyone's thoughts, holding space, the empty box that should be here for Marty, the empty Zoom box. And also, the last few days, a range of emotions have crossed, have flooded my heart, my whole body. And I know we all come from different backgrounds. I know we all have different political views and faith views. And so I just look to this group as hope for the future, and appreciate whenever something like this happens, knowing that the relationships that we all actively foster always just helps anchor me. So I thank you all.
Thank you. And then we'll start with our first speaker. Our first author is Alvin Stenzel, who is a member of Bradley Hills Presbyterian Church. He is a retired certified public accountant. Thanks to technology, he continues to worship and support the life of the church community from Florida. He has published poems, articles, and short stories, as well as 3 books. His latest is his first novel, The Crystal Pond, A Young Girl's Journey Through Imagination. Alvin?
Thank you. I appreciate so much the opportunity to be here. With all the horror that we've been seeing on television in the last couple of days, maybe it's good that I go first, because my book I'm going to talk about may be the lightest of any that we hear about tonight. It is a modern fairy tale, and it is lighthearted, it is entertaining, and I'm going to talk a lot more about how and why it was written than I am about the book itself. The reason being that it was written 35 years ago and just recently was published. And that will set the stage for the story of why the book was written. Briefly, though, it's the story of an 11-year-old girl who takes a walk in the woods near her home and meets a mystical green man of the forest. And in their conversation, she learns about the power of her imagination. And he tells her that with that imagination, she can accomplish most anything she would want in her life. And he also tells her that he meets with every young woman as she begins to grow up and gives them these messages. And she asks him, of course, well, if this is true, why has nobody ever mentioned you before? And the answer is that after the meetings he has, the young women forget they've ever had this meeting, but they never forget the lessons that they've learned. So that's as much as I'm going to tell you about how the book starts. But now let me tell you why I wrote it 35 years ago. 35 years ago, I used to walk my dogs to the end of the street in the afternoon to let them play in the woods. And very often, as I walked down the street, I passed the house where a single mother and her 10-year-old daughter lived. Very often, the young lady would be out in the front yard dancing like you would not believe, doing grand jetés across the yard. And at 10 years old, I had never seen anything like that. So I was obviously impressed, and more I began to stop and talk with them, began to become very, very fond of both of them, especially the mother, and became very good friends with them. Found out that Kim, the young lady, liked video games. Now, 35 years ago, most of you may remember video games were a lot different than they are now, but she was playing Super Mario Brothers. And I said, I would love to learn how to play Super Mario Brothers. So she and I got together once a week and she taught me how to play. And I became even more fond of her. So for her 11th birthday, I wrote her a story based on the video game. It was a story about life and what you learn as you have failures as you go through life and how to recover from them. So that was the first thing I wrote for her. But then, as Christmas was coming up that year, I started thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to give this young lady for Christmas? I looked through catalogs, found a small pink crystal heart, which you may or may not be able to see. There we go. And comes in a little pink leather pouch. I said, oh, that would be wonderful. It's exactly what I want to give her. But then I thought, that's a rather intimate present for a young lady with whom I have no real connection. So what could I do? I'll write her a story and explain how she ends up with the crystal. So in a very short period of time, I wrote the story that I just gave you the introduction. And let me say, it was a wonderful Christmas present. So a couple of months later, early March, her next birthday was coming up. And it was, oh no, what do I do now for the next present? How about writing a sequel? So I wrote a sequel to the first part, where Kim in the story is 10 years older. She goes back to the woods and becomes the first young lady ever to meet the mystical green man in the forest the second time. And he has called her to come back and meet with him because he has a major challenge that he needs her help with. And before I finished that, I knew, okay, there's got to be a trilogy. There's got to be a third part to this. So the trilogy was 10 years later when Kim was 31. And before that was over, I knew it was going to be 5 parts. So the novel ends up as a 5-part novel covering 40 years of Kim's life. And during those years, other characters come, as you can imagine, and it becomes a very fascinating story with undercurrents and surprises and adventures. And because it's been out for so long and I've been sharing it with people for so many years, I have some of the most amazing feedback and comments. The book is on Amazon. If you go and look on Amazon, there are, excuse me, comments from fairly well-known people on the inside of the front cover, comments from others who read it on the back cover, and they will do a better job of explaining to you the importance of the book than I can myself. The final part of the wonderful story is that several years later, Kim did become my stepdaughter. I married her mother and entered her life in the way that I had always wanted to be, which is why I wrote the story, to be honest, was to tell her the strength I thought that she could have herself. And she continued her dance training. She was at the Washington School of Ballet for 10 years, which I think is longer than any other student had ever been there. And she was actually there the same time Chelsea Clinton was dancing at the Washington School. They were the same age, so they often had the same role in the Nutcracker. And the joke always was that my stepdaughter never got to spend a night in the White House, but her clothes did, because they exchanged clothes all the time. So the final good news is that she studied so hard and worked so hard that she was one of 12 women accepted in the Juilliard School in their dance program in her freshman year, went on to become a professional dancer. And my novel is my tribute to her. And she now has 2 daughters of just about the same age as when I wrote the story for her. So I am now Grandpa Al, and I could not be more happy. So that's the story of the Crystal Pond. And if there are questions later, I can go into it more deeply. But I have been told that from the first part, which was all that was ever supposed to happen, there were so many presages to what was going to come later. And that always tickled me, that people thought I had it all planned out the whole way. And each part was totally separate. I never thought from day to day what I was going to write the next day. So it was kind of a miracle. It was something inside of me that just had to come out. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alvin. And I'm sure there will be questions and put them in the chat if you're afraid you're going to forget them. Our next author is Laura Kahn, a member of Bethesda Jewish Congregation. She's a physician, educator, and author, and the co-founder of the One Health Initiative, which I will let her explain. She has written many nonfiction books and articles. She has written a science fiction novella, Thorns, When Earth Refugees Are the Aliens. And she wrote the novella to introduce middle grade students to the One Health concept. Laura?
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And well, Alvin's story is a tough act to follow, so I'll do my best. But it's a pleasure to be with you this evening on this very solemn period in world history. I wrote Thorns, When Earth Refugees Are the Aliens. It's, as Mary said, a science fiction novella, and it's meant for middle grade students. One health is the concept that human, animal, plant, environmental, and ecosystem health are linked. And while that might seem obvious to many of you, it's generally not how we approach health and wellness and disease. One health is a relatively new term, but really an ancient concept. And in fact, you can go all the way back to Hippocrates, ancient Greek physician, who recognized that people would get sick when they went to low-lying swampy areas. And it would take several thousand years before scientists figured out that mosquitoes and other insects can spread disease. And in fact, the term malaria literally means bad air. So they recognized that it was bad air, but it took a while before they figured out that it was actually mosquitoes spreading disease. So this book then has two themes. The first is One Health, and I weave through the chapters the concept that human, animal, plant, and it's got all the elements. It's got humans, animals, I even have plant as a main character, environments and ecosystems. The other theme is the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's basically two parallel stories of a 13-year-old young boy named Siddhartha Bodhi. Siddhartha is traveling with his parents and with other small band of humans who are fleeing Earth for a variety of different reasons. And in fact, one of the main thrusts of the story is Siddhartha, or Siddhi for short, has to find out why his family left Earth, because they didn't tell him. And he had his own ideas, but he was more excited by the adventures of space travel and going to a new planet than thinking about all the implications of leaving Earth and the different families that also had to leave Earth for a variety of reasons. The other story that alternates with Siddhi's story is the story of the native inhabitant of the planet, and that's Blue. Blue is a 13-day-old Kodria. Kodria are the names of the creatures, the plant-like creatures that live on the planet. And it is, their civilization is organized kind of like a beehive where you've got a queen and she gives birth to all the other Kodria. And the main rule in Philim, their civilization, is that all Kodria must grow thorns. And if you don't grow thorns, then there's no place for you in their society and you must be killed. So the main concern and desire by Blue is she must grow thorns. And so her coming of age is rather wrought. I won't go into the details in the hopes that you'll read the story, but the chapters kind of intersect between her and cities, the humans' land, and then their two worlds or their two lives collide. And again, all of it is illustrating the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as One Health. So it's meant to be educational, as well as hopefully entertaining for both kids and for adults as well. I wrote this book over 10 years. It was not an easy book to write, but it's my hope that the messages get shared widely. It's a message of hope and of global sustainability. So I'll leave it at that. I don't know how long I've taken to speak, but thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Laura. I think that was probably about 5 minutes, maybe. Very good. And I can't wait to find out more about One Health. Our next author is Andrew Yarrow, a regular visitor at BHPC, and he's a former New York Times reporter and historian who teaches at George Mason University. He has written 6 books, including Look, How a Highly Influential Magazine Helped Define Mid-20th Century America. I don't know how they fit that on the cover. And Man Out, Men on the Sidelines of American Life. He is now working on a documentary. Andrew?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for your attention. My book tells the story of Look magazine, which some of us of a certain age may remember. Look published from 1937 to 1971, so it went out of business about 52 years ago. For those who remember Look, it's often kind of confused with Life magazine. It's often thought of just in terms of its many great photographs, and often thought about as, you know, kind of a middle-brow magazine. But what I do in my book is tell the story of a magazine that really was, in many ways, none of those things. Look, while it did compete with Life, was very different from Life. Look was a bi-weekly, so hence did only feature stories, whereas Life was a weekly magazine. And Look was a much more daring and arguably more progressive magazine than Life, and gave its writers much more leeway in what they could say and how they said it. As one writer told me, who I interviewed in the course of writing the book, Look stories ranged from the pits of bad taste to the visionary and brilliant, and which was really true. And the publisher of Look magazine, Mike Coles, often spoke of the magazine as being one, its philosophy being that of tough-minded optimism. It was a magazine that in many ways captured the spirit of mid-20th century America and also influenced that spirit. It was a time of tremendous optimism, at least up until the Vietnam War, a time of great rising prosperity, expanding rights, civil rights, women's rights, and the like. And Look had an enormous circulation. It, at its peak, sold about 8 million copies, which translated into about 35 million readers. It had great photographers, many names who you don't know, but some who you do, like Stanley Kubrick got his start there as a 16-year-old as a staff photographer. Many great writers, many guest contributors, many public intellectuals ranging from, you know, Hemingway to Martin Luther King Jr., to Adlai Stevenson, Eleanor Roosevelt, on and on. But Look was particularly noteworthy for its coverage in a couple of areas. Its writings about racial injustice and the civil rights movement going back to the late 1930s, right on down to its last days. Perhaps one of its most famous stories or series of stories was when it exposed Emmett Till's murderers after the murderers were acquitted in 1955 by an all-white jury. It was the only magazine, only publication to send writers down and a photographer to interview the murderers, who not only confessed to the murders, but bragged about them, which many people saw as kind of a catalyst for the civil rights movement. It also brought Norman Rockwell from the Saturday Evening Post, where he wasn't allowed to depict African Americans in other than subservient positions. At Look, he did 30 paintings, mostly civil rights paintings, perhaps the most famous being the one of the little girl, Ruby Bridges, being escorted by federal marshals to integrate public schools in New Orleans in the early 1960s, or also his painting Murder in Mississippi, about the 3 civil rights workers murdered during Freedom Summer in Mississippi. but also did many, many other very powerful civil rights stories. It also did a lot of coverage of social and cultural change in America, of the early days of the women's movement, second wave feminism, what was then known as women's lib, certainly the early environmental movement, the youth movement of the 60s, the counterculture, the radical psychology of the 60s, and even did a sympathetic story on gay marriage in 1971. But beyond that, it also was very strong in covering the Cold War. And the publisher of Look, Mike Coles, who came from Iowa, he had been the publisher of the Des Moines Register, where he moved Look from Des Moines to New York in 1940. But Coles, who called himself a liberal Republican, wanted to present the peoples of the world as people who American readers could identify with in an era before television was widespread, and even after television swept the country in the 50s, before color TV became widespread in the late 60s. And so there were powerful stories behind the Iron Curtain. As Mary mentioned, I'm now working on a documentary about Look. I was speaking with one of the former writers for Look, Chris Wren, just a few weeks ago, who was talking about not only his civil rights coverage, not only his coverage of the Vietnam War, but how he was in the Soviet Union for the 50th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution for a big package that Look did in 1967. It was also the first major American magazine to go into communist China in 1956 and send back photos of communist China. And a great story from one of the photographers, the photographer who was there, apparently Zhou Enlai, Mao's number 2 at the time, asked this photographer, Phil Harrington, remember this was 1956, what did he think of Elvis Presley? Of course, Elvis Presley had just hit the scene, and you wouldn't have thought of the number 2 in communist China a few years after the revolution to ask about Elvis, and the Look photographer told him, well, I think he's a flash in the pan. Of course, that proved not to be true. Look also covered the Cuban Revolution, one of its many women reporters. Look was pioneered in promoting women and African American writers going back to the early 1950s, people like Carl Rowan and Ernest Dunbar, some of the earliest Black writers for a mainstream, basically a white magazine in the early 1950s. But similarly, women reporters like Laura Bergquist, who was with Che Guevara, and the famous photo of Che with the cigar in his mouth first appeared in Look. And Laura Bergquist, who also covered JFK, famously told the story of how JFK, who tried to hit on her, of course, was jealous of Che Guevara, thinking, was Che Guevara, a hotter man than he, JFK, was. But, and the last executive editor of Look, Pat Carbine, who is still alive and went on to co-found Ms. Magazine and brought Gloria Steinem to write a piece, Why America Needs a Woman President, in 1976 for Look. Pat Carbine was the first female executive editor of a non-women's magazine in the US for Look. So, there are many, many stories in Look. It published just shy of 35 years. It went out of business like Life a few months later in 1972, basically because of the pressures, one, of television, two, of specialized publications, magazines the Sports Illustrated, the Psychology Today's, things that weren't general interest magazines like Look and Life, or the Saturday Evening Post for that matter. And so I tell the story of Look. I have some of the, a few of the many photographs that appeared in Look, all told about 180,000 pictures appeared in Look over the years. And the single largest collection of images in the Library of Congress are 4 to 5 million Look images. So happy to take questions at the end. Thank you all.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next presenter is going to be Ahmad, and I'm sure he messed up his name. He's representing the MIIC, which is the Islamic Center that meets at 6601. He's a Palestinian American scholar. He has taught at Wesley Theological Seminary and Maryland, Georgetown, and Johns Hopkins universities. He has written about democracy in the Muslim world, Islam and legal and religious freedom, Islamic civil society, and American civil liberties. He is active in U.S. Libertarian Party causes. He has written Signs in the Heavens, a Muslim astronomer's perspective on religion and science, and Islamic Rules of Order. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. As I have only 6 minutes, I shall restrict myself to explaining why I wrote this book, Signs in the Heavens, a Muslim astronomer's perspective on religion and science, and what its purposes were, and to relate a few highlights. I had been a working astronomer since my time of graduating college in 1970 until the late 1980s, when I turned my attention to Islamic studies, because while there were thousands of competent astronomers in the United States, the Iranian Revolution demonstrated that the so-called experts on Islam seemed to be ignorant of the subject, as they were taken by surprise by the revolution, and their after-the-fact explanations for it were incoherent. Because of my expertise in science, I was frequently called upon to lecture on the relationship between religion and science, and especially on the relationship in Islamic thought and in history. A small book publisher who was a convert to Islam attended one of these lectures and afterwards approached me and asked if I could write a book on the subject. In response, I said, I could if you could publish it, and he said he would. The result was Signs in the Heavens, a Muslim astronomer's perspective on religion and science. The book deals with two themes. The first is that the perception of an inherent contradiction or conflict between religion and science is an accident of Western history. And the second is that during the Islamic Golden Age, science flourished precisely because the Quran encourages humans to look deeply into God's signs in the heavens and on earth and in ourselves. To take the second point first, the Islamic view of nature is that it is subject to the rule of God's laws, and the belief in such laws and the desire to comprehend them is not an act of irreverence. On the contrary, the Quran commands us to pursue this inquiry, which is to encourage us to engage in science and scientific research. The Quran presents Abraham, the prophet, as an example of someone who adopted this view even before receiving any direct revelation. And here I'd like to read to you from the passage from the book. The idea that the contemplation of the signs in the heavens and the earth leads to the conclusion of the existence of a single God is a recurrent theme in the Quran. The specific experience of arriving at monotheism through astronomical observations of alleged deities is described by a particular passage in the Quran. Describing the experience of the prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, the Quran says, "So also did we show Abraham the power and the laws of the heavens and the earth, that he might with understanding have certitude. When the night covered him over, he saw a star. He said, 'This is my Lord.' But when it set, he said, 'I love not those that set.' When he saw the moon rising in splendor, he said, 'This is my Lord.' But when the moon set, he said, 'Unless my Lord guide me, I shall surely be among those who go astray.' When he saw the sun rising in splendor, he said, 'This is my Lord. This is the greatest of all.' But when the sun set, he said, 'O my people, I am indeed free from your guilt of giving partners to God.'" Abraham taught to both branches of his growing family, Isaac and Ishmael, peace be upon them, and their offspring, the important fundamental truth that he had learned. Nature is not under the control of capricious and conflicting gods. It follows the grand design of a single designer. This was not a mysterious secret to be kept among a priesthood, but a practical fact of life, which was the responsibility of every individual to understand. Now, although there was a dispute in the early Islamic civilization over the question of rationalism, that is the view that reason by itself is a sufficient guide to knowledge, this is not the same as a dispute over science. In fact, by overthrowing the Aristotelian view that, quote, "everything is what it is because it can be no other way," close quote, Islam smoothed the path into modern inductive method of science, in which rational theories must be tested empirically. Case in point, Ptolemy's value of precession. The great ancient astronomer Ptolemy, among his many achievements, had calculated the value of precession. However, he never observed the stars in order to check his value. On the contrary, using a star manual from many centuries earlier, he used his value of precession to calculate the positions of the stars in his own time and published that as a catalog of star positions. If he had bothered to measure them, he would have discovered and corrected his own error, but he did not. Why should he? Everything is what it is because it can be no other way. There was no need to test his theory. Muslim astronomers kept looking at the positions of stars and noticing that they did not match Ptolemy's theory of the precession. By the way, for those who don't know what precession is, you know, the Earth spins like a top, and therefore its axis, if you've ever watched a toy top spinning, you'll notice that not only does it turn around the axis, but the axis itself will slowly rotate like this around the perpendicular to the gravitational field. The Earth being like a top, it does the same thing. Now, admittedly, the ancients thought that the Earth wasn't spinning, but the universe was spinning, but the theory would still be the same. There would be a precession, a movement of the pole. And Ptolemy knew about the movement of the pole, he just had the value wrong. When Muslims measured it and saw that their positions of stars didn't match, weren't consistent with Ptolemy's, they thought at first that precession must be changing. But they didn't stop. They kept measuring, and they found that precession was not changing, and reluctantly came to the conclusion that the great ancient astronomer had just made a horrible, horrible blunder. Now, going back to my first theme, the Western Church made a big mistake by marrying its metaphysics to Aristotelian physics. When Galileo pointed his telescope at the heavens, he saw that the empirical facts did not support the allegedly axiomatic claims of the geocentric system. The revolution he fostered was not only a revolution, it was only a revolution in the Western context. It was because of the marriage of the great chain of being with Ptolemy's view of the universe. The church believed that God was this great being out there somewhere, and the earth was at the center of the universe, And under God was the Son and the archangels, and then the angels, and so on. And then on earth there was the church and the Pope, and under the Pope the priests, and under him the believers and men, and then women, and then animals, and then plants, and so on. And then you go into the earth and you get down to the realm of the devils. And they have equated this with the Ptolemaic system that had the earth literally at the center of the universe. But the revolution that he fostered was only a revolution in that context. In Islam, there is no hierarchy of being. There is only the great divide between the creator and the created. Before Galileo was persecuted, Giordano Bruno, who was knowledgeable in Islamic writings, was burned at the stake for saying that Copernicus did not go far enough. Not only did the earth not go around the sun, but there were many other stellar systems in the universe, all of them of equal value under one divinity. Globally, the Galilean system was a logical conclusion of the discoveries of Muslim astronomers like Tusi and Ibn Shatir, and I don't have time to cover them here, so hopefully you'll read my book and read about what they contributed. Instead, I will tell you this anecdote. When I sent an early draft of my book to the great historian of science, Owen Gingerich, he objected to my claim that there was some influence on Copernicus by the Muslim astronomers. He said, it's not possible. Copernicus didn't understand Arabic. How would he have possibly have learned about the Muslim astronomers? So I sent my book to another great historian of science, Edward Kennedy, not the politician, the astronomer. And Edward Kennedy read it and he wrote back to me and he said, the question is not whether Copernicus was exposed to the Arab writings. It was when and how. And he referred me to a book by Nordlinger and Swerdlow, who said that it was because Copernicus learned astronomy not in Europe, not in Germany, not in Poland, where they didn't have any astronomy teachings. He had to go to the University of Padua, a part of Italy that had been ruled by the Muslims. And there he learned about astronomy from people who did know Arabic and would have been familiar with the Arabic writings. Religion and science only seem to conflict to those who do not realize that they attempt to answer different questions. Science asks how. Religion asks why. I'll close by urging you to buy the book. You can get it at minaret.org. It's also available at Amazon.
I tried to unmute myself. Thank you, Imad. Jerusalem Work is our next author. She's representing the MIIC, and she's a creative writer and an ESOL instructor. She has I guess it's an ESL. I'm not sure of the difference. Anyway, she has a heart for interfaith dialogue and community building. She has a degree in library science and thinks that paradise might be a library. She has written The New Jerusalem and another book, Ideations, Musing of a Muslim Beauty. Jerusalem?
Yes, Mary, thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Peace and blessings. It's an honor to be here tonight at Authors Among Us. I hope to awaken the author within each one of us. The title of my talk tonight is From Bank Teller to Storyteller, Words Are My Currency. Not to present a false dichotomy, it's not either or. You can be both a bank teller and a storyteller. But tonight I'd like to share my career transition from working in a bank to becoming an author. I share my creative writing on Amazon, SoundCloud, social media, and my blog. I mainly write short stories and poetry, as well as essays and creative nonfiction. One day at the bank, many years ago, my coworker stationed at the drive-thru barged into my workspace as I manned the counter in the front lobby. My coworker said, "Oh, I made a mistake in a transaction. I gave the woman more money than she requested. I hope she's Muslim," he said. I asked him why. He said, because there is no forgiveness in Islam. He wanted her to be punished for his mistake, What a misconception about Islam. Allah is most forgiving, most merciful, most compassionate. Another day at the bank, a customer approached me and said, "Why are you wearing that? It's not Halloween." As if my hijab were part of an elaborate costume. I faced Islamophobia, disparaging words, and discrimination. So I left the bank and began working retail. One sunny afternoon, I was sitting in a public library, reading a book called Halfway Heaven. It's the story of Senadu Taddese, the Harvard student who so desperately wanted to tell her life story, but due to depression, she resorted to violence. It was a famous story. Senadu took her life after she took the life of her roommate. A painful, heartbreaking story of life ending before it truly began. This reminds me of the Maya Angelou quote, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." At the library, stories are collected, memories are made, history reimagined. I felt freedom in an open book. The library is such a peaceful place. I began to volunteer in the circulation department. I ultimately pursued a master's degree in library science. I graduated as a generalist. I studied many different aspects of library science, including reference, circulation, cataloging, storytelling, archiving, oral history, information literacy instruction, and more. In my career, I've worked in special, public, and academic libraries. I volunteered in Jewish libraries. Like Solomon, I sought wisdom. I came across a book with a Jewish proverb. A book serves as a second homeland. This perfectly put into words how I felt as a reader and a writer. I felt at home. I want to make marginalized people feel at home, feel centered in the story. As an Ethiopian American librarian, I come from a culture rich with diversity, religious and ethnic distinctions. One day I read in the Quran, chapter 31, verse 27, "If all the earth's trees were pens and the oceans were ink, the words of Allah would not be exhausted." I was and am in awe of Allah. I chose to commit my life to writing. In Islam, it is incumbent upon every soul to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Now that's lifelong learning. I currently teach English as a second language and share my creative writing with the world. Sometimes my ESL students bring me flowers. I'm grateful. This aligns with my belief that everyone deserves their flowers in their lifetime. I often bring my students chocolate and other sweets. Of course, what happens in the classroom is extremely important. From icebreakers to vocabulary and grammar exercises to role play. But our gift-giving gestures warm the heart. I teach in an intensive program. It's challenging and rewarding. I'll close with a quote from the Tao Te Ching. "When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. When the student is truly ready, the teacher will disappear." I enjoy removing the training wheels from my students and giving them wings to fly. Education gives us independence and confidence. I'm so proud when my students become lifelong learners. That's my dream, to inspire lifelong learners. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you all listening to my little presentation. And here is my poetry book, Seek His Face. Most of my work is interfaith. It's for interfaith audiences. Patience and Prayer. We have one of my first, it's a short story, My Jerusalem, semi-novel short story, and then the New Jerusalem. And they're all available on Amazon. I hope you enjoy yourselves this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerusalem. And in conclusion, Maran Gluckstein, a member of BJC, discusses her late husband, Dr. Fritz Gluckstein's book, Geltungsjude, Counted as a Jew in Hitler's Berlin. He was born in Berlin in 1927 to a Jewish father and a Christian mother. He passed away in 2021. Maran was on the staff of BJC from 1988 until retirement in 2002. So many of you may know her. She has interviewed Holocaust survivors for the Holocaust Museum and the Shoah Foundation. Maran?
Thank you for having me. I was fortunate to be married to Fritz Gluckstein, who was a wonderful human being. He took with him a knowledge of the importance of all human beings and all creatures. At his funeral, I told people the fact that to let it free. And that was the kind of human being he was. In his career, he was the coordinator of the veterinary section of the National Library of Medicine. Science, and he was a veterinarian. His job was to do research, and when the congressman wanted to know what the might happen with the hormones, expert in zoonoses, which are diseases that are transmissible from animals to man. And of course, we know today how much that happened. His mother was Christian. He was raised as a Jew. At that time, interestingly enough, in Berlin, there was 44% intermarriage. Has been experienced by assimilated Jews in Berlin and in Germany and other places. When Hitler came to power, his father, who was a judge, were living in much reduced circumstances, but because he was of a mixed marriage, he and his family were living called Mischlinge, which is basically saying they're mongrels. The farther you were from Berlin, the more you were likely to be persecuted if you had any Jews. What exactly to do with these people? Because Fritz was raised as a Jew, he was called a Geltungsjude, literally counted as a Jew. And after he retired, the National Library of Medicine, he went to work as a volunteer at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum even before the museum was physically in existence. And what he did was translations. Old German script called name I'm forgetting at the moment, doesn't matter. It looks like chicken scratches, up and down and up and down and up and down, and he was able to read this stuff. Outside of Germany, and in this kind of script, and he worked for the museum as a volunteer and did translations of documents. Course that the museum offered to their survivor volunteers to help them put their life stories in writing. And out of that came a number of books called Fritz wrote his own book. It's called Geltungsjude, And there he is as a young man of 16 or so. He lived the entire about the Holocaust before I ever knew Fritz very well. And I had never heard of such a thing. I knew there were people in hiding, I knew there were partisans, but because they did not put to work cleaning up after air raids, building tank barriers, things like that. But they were not supported. Things that happened to all of the Jews, they had to turn over all of their belongings, they had to, even their pets, they had to give over. But he survived the war. That's 80 some odd pages long, and they're all very short and readable things. They start from before the war, go through the war, and after the war as well. Everyday heroes is what he thought of his teachers who came to work in the Jewish schools, even in the face of deportation. And he says that he was picked up more than once by the Gestapo. His 60th birthday was spent being questioned by the Gestapo. This particular story be out there in the world. Each and every survivor will tell you that they had to be very lucky. What I strongly admire about Fritz is that he came through this horrible experience, I think in part because he was with his parents through the whole thing. And he pancreatic cancer actually, and he had a daughter, and she has two daughters, and we were married for 24 years. After he lost his wife. To be out there along with all the others. For a long time, he did not consider himself a survivor because he had not been in the camps or suffered horribly. In any way, shape, or form. And his certainly was. So I hope that you will read Geltung Judah and see his life as he experienced it. Yeah. He talks about the jokes that people told to get through these experiences. And I wrote the introduction to it, and I said, come see me. May his memory be for a blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Maran. I'm sure that this will be of interest to a lot of people. And thank you all to all of the presenters tonight, all of the people who took the time to prepare and come and share their novels with us, their writings. And I hope that some of the listeners will pick up some of the things that were offered to you and read them. And I think we can switch to the chat if the people in the audience have questions. Tasmia, have you seen anything in the chat?
I haven't noticed any question, But Barnes looked like he asked, what's the name of Maran's book? And Maran, you have replied, right? You have showed your books. Okay. And I don't see any other question.
Oh, okay. Well, then let's take questions from the group.
Okay.
I was sure that people do have some questions. Yes. David. David,
What a great evening, one and all, just a great evening. I was going to ask my bank teller poetry friend here for the name of her interfaith poetry book, because I missed it when you held it up.
Yes, it's Seek His Face.
Seek His Face. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right? You want to talk?
Me.
well, one of the questions that people often ask is, how did you decide what to write about? And of course, Alvin explained it thoroughly. So is there anybody else who would like to talk about why they chose to write about the thing that they did? I'm wondering about Andrew. How did you get involved with Look in such detail?
Well, thank you. As a journalist and a historian who's taught post-war American history and who, thinks that era really from the end of World War II to the early 70s was in many ways a high watermark in American history. It was very appealing to me, and appealing to me too in terms of the fact that this was a medium, this was a magazine that reached literally tens of millions of people. And as I talk about in my book, a quote that I liked from former President Obama, he's talked about how Americans have lost the ability to have a common conversation, a common national conversation. And, media like Look, like Life, like the three networks, facilitated those kinds of conversations that we really no longer can have in our environment of, very fractured media and social media and opinionated media. So that appealed to me a lot. And I don't know if we'll ever be able to get back to that kind of media environment or politics, but it's an appealing one to me.
Thank you. And I think several other people did explain how they chose what they wrote about. I can't wait to read the one that Laura Kahn did, because having been a biology teacher, I think I can understand it. And somebody told me once, probably a librarian, that you never outgrow the what she called junior literature, which would be middle grades. So if there's something you don't know anything about, it's coming up in the news, it's a good place to go to the library and find out the background. But thank you, Laura.
My pleasure. Yeah, I tried to put in a lot of science. It's a hard science fiction book, and there's no fantasy in this. There's often a blurred line between science fiction and fantasy. And actually an agent told me what the difference is. She says a fantasy novel is a novel with unicorns and fairies and things that just cannot exist. A science fiction novel, if it has aliens can exist. There might be alien life on other planets, so it's not fantasy. So that's the difference. It has to have some basis of reality in science, in life. Fantasy does not have that. And unfortunately, many of the books that are touted as science fiction are actually fantasy. So my book is strictly science fiction.
Thank you. And I'm glad you gave me that explanation because I had no idea.
Alvin was agreeing. I wonder why.
Well, I would have to say that mine on the surface obviously looks like a fantasy, but anybody who read it and thought about it a little bit, you might be surprised how many aspects of science fiction there are hidden within the story. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yes, and I know that you can get Alvin's on a Kindle or because I had gotten it earlier.
It's only $2.99 on Kindle.
Mine's on Amazon KDP as well.
Oh, okay, thank you. And Maran, where can we get your book? Oh, you're muted. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you back up when you speak?
On Amazon.
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, are there any other questions? Yes. Is that Bernard or Shirley?
They're muted.
Yes, you're muted. Shirley, you're muted.
Okay. Okay. What I would like to know, I forgot his name, the author of the book about Look magazine.
Oh, Andrew. Yes.
Who?
Andrew Yarrow.
Okay, Andrew. Andrew, could you tell me as much as time allows about the Saturday Evening Post as as compared to Look at, because my father subscribed to the Saturday Evening Post.
Sure. The mid-20th century was really the heyday of mass circulation magazines. The Saturday Evening Post, Collier, Look, and Life, all had huge circulations. As I mentioned, the Saturday Evening Post was in many ways a much more conservative magazine than Look. The story of Norman Rockwell, who did covers for the Saturday Evening Post for decades, is emblematic. He left the Saturday Evening Post in his early 70s for Look because they were basically a pretty racist magazine. They didn't want to portray Black people in other than subservient positions. But all of these magazines had huge circulations, and the Saturday Evening Post folded in the mid 60s before, and as did Collier's before Look and Life. But I'd be happy to say more about them offline, or I talk a little bit about them, or I do talk about them in my book, the comparisons.
Oh, thank you.
Marilyn?
My question is for Maran. Could you tell us a little bit about your experiences at the Holocaust Museum when you interviewed survivors?
I couldn't hear her.
I was wondering if you could talk about your experiences at the Holocaust Museum when you interviewed survivors?
You hear me?
I can't hear you.
I don't know what to say. I don't know why I'm not being heard. I would love to tell you about it. I can talk, but you can't hear me. So
Maybe I'll call you sometime.
Marin, hi, it's Elizabeth. I just wanted to make sure that you got my message about if you wanted to type something up, I can put it in the description of the video. So if you all are interested, it'll be under the YouTube description for this video.
don't know.
Yeah, I would like to say one last thank you to everybody who presented tonight. I am just an incredible reader. I have been down here in Florida for 6 years, and today I finished my 253rd book that I've read since I got here. So I now have a new set of additions to my list, and I very much appreciate that. So thank you for letting me know about all the efforts that you put into writing, and very impressive group of people.
Mary, you're muted. Mary, you're muted. Mary, you're muted.
See, it should be there. It's not there.
Okay, hi. So we didn't hear what you just said.
I wanted to thank everybody for all of their efforts and attending. And unless there are other questions, we could say good night. No more. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy reading.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you all. I will be posting the video in the Bradley Hills YouTube page. It'll be on in our weekly emails as well. If you're not on the weekly email chain, you are more than welcome to email me at elizabeth@bradleyhillschurch.org, and I will send it directly, or I will send you a link. So, and I'll put that in the chat for everyone, my email.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for all the work that you've done on this.
Of course, I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. And thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.